Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive?
Always.
So today we're looking at the case of Thomas Otis Knight. Um, he's a guy who spent almost 40 years on death row.
39 to be exact.
Wow, 39. That's crazy.
It's a long time, yeah.
And you know what's even crazier is he was only on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for like 3 months.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes his case so interesting. I mean, just in those 3 months. And then, of course, his whole life, uh, a lot happened that makes you really think about crime and punishment and, all those gray areas.
Totally. So this guy, he was involved in like a double murder. He escaped from jail.
Oh, and he even killed a corrections officer using a sharpened spoon.
No way. A sharpened spoon.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Okay, so we got to unpack this story. Like, where do we even begin with a case like this?
Well, if we want to really understand Knight's story, how he got to this point, we really need to start at the beginning.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Like, what was his childhood like?
Um, so just imagine this, okay? This guy, he grows up surrounded by mental illness, abuse, neglect.
Oh, no.
Yeah, his father was an alcoholic, and he used to beat his kids. He even raped Knight's sister in front of him.
Oh, my God. That's horrific.
It's terrible. And, experts who study, criminals and crime, they'll tell you that this kind of trauma, this can be a major influence on how someone turns out.
Totally. It's like, how can you not be affected by that?
Right.
Especially as a kid.
Exactly. And, this wasn't a one-time thing. His life was basically just constant violence and instability, It was a rough start. He had his first run-in with the law when he was only 9 for stealing.
Wow, 9 years old.
9 years old. And then by 15, he was already in prison for burglary.
Oh, wow. So pretty young. So it sounds like he had a pretty tough life.
Yeah.
But was his mental health ever addressed? Like, did anyone try to help him?
He was actually committed to a mental hospital when he was 19. Yeah. And they diagnosed him with a paranoid personality disorder, plus drug and poison intoxication.
So he was definitely struggling. I guess that helps explain some things, but obviously didn't excuse his actions.
For sure. It's just part of the story.
Okay, so let's talk about the double murder now. It happened in Miami, right?
Yeah. 1974. Miami. That's where things get really bad.
So what happened?
Okay, so picture this. Knight's got a rifle. He kidnaps his boss, this guy named Sidney Gans, and makes him drive home to get his wife, Lillian.
Oh, man.
Then he tells them to go to the bank and take out $50,000.
This is crazy. It's like a movie or something.
It is pretty wild.
So what happened to the Ganses? Like, did they try to get away or anything?
Actually, they did. While they were at the bank, Sidney, the husband, he tried to signal for help.
He did.
He did. That's what got the FBI and the police involved. There was even a high-speed chase, but the police lost them for a bit.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's scary. And when they finally found their car,
Well, I thought,
it was abandoned at a construction site. And, well, Sidney and Lillian, they were both dead, shot in the neck.
oh, man, that's just awful. So did Knight get away then?
Not for long. They actually caught him just a few hours later. He still had the rifle and the money.
Oh, wow. So they got him. Case closed, right?
Well, you'd think so, but hold on tight because things are about to get even crazier. He escapes.
No way. From jail.
Uh-huh. While he was waiting for his trial for the murders, he and 10 other inmates broke out of the Miami-Dade County Jail.
Wow, that's bold. So what happened after that?
There was a huge manhunt, obviously, but Knight, he didn't lay low. He actually started robbing places.
Seriously. This guy can't stop. Armed robbery.
Yeah, armed robbery.
Yeah.
And sadly, it led to another tragedy. During a liquor store robbery in Georgia, he shot and killed the clerk, a guy named William Culpepper, and he also wounded another clerk.
This is insane. Wait, how much did he even get from the robbery?
$640.
What? $640?
Yeah. Crazy, right? After all that risk.
That just doesn't make any sense. Like, what was he even thinking? So after all this is where he ends up on the FBI's most wanted list, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so now he's a fugitive. But how long did he stay on the run?
It was actually pretty short-lived. Just 3 weeks after they put him on the list, the FBI got him. They found him at a rooming house in Florida. SWAT team, the whole 9 yards.
That must have been a huge relief for everyone.
For sure. But it wasn't over yet. He was heavily armed. They found a sawed-off shotgun, a 9mm automatic, and even a .38 caliber revolver. All stolen, of course.
Wow. So they finally got him back behind bars. But the story doesn't end there, does it? What happens next?
Well, now he's got to face trial for those murders, the Ganses, and he's back on death row, right? But, get this, another horrible thing happened.
Oh, no. This must be where he kills the corrections officer, right? With the spoon.
You got it. In 1980, he stabbed this officer, Richard Burke, with a sharpened spoon that he somehow turned into a weapon.
I mean, what would even make him do something like that?
Yeah.
Especially while he's already on death row. What was he thinking?
Get this, he was furious because they made him shave his beard before he could have visitors.
No way. Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. That's what set him off.
He killed someone because they made him shave. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
So what happened after that?
Well, he got another death sentence, obviously, but his execution actually got delayed for decades because of all the appeals and legal stuff.
Decades. Wow. Okay, so this is where things get really complicated, right?
It does, and we'll dig into those appeals and what happened tonight next time in part 2 of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
So last time we were talking about how Thomas Knight ended up back on death row, this time for killing a corrections officer, Richard Burke, with a sharpened spoon. And you mentioned that his execution was delayed for years and years because of appeals. Decades, right?
Right, decades. A lot of appeals.
So what was going on with those appeals? What were the big legal arguments?
Well, you see, Knight's case, it became kind of a focal point in the whole death penalty debate, especially about how long people could be kept on death row. You know, that whole idea of prolonged confinement, like, is there a limit?
Right. It makes sense that that would be a big issue.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Knight's lawyers, they were saying that executing someone after 39 years on death row, that's basically cruel and unusual punishment. And that violates the Eighth Amendment, right?
Okay, I can see how they could argue that. But to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on what the Eighth Amendment actually says.
Oh, sure. So basically, the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution, it says you can't have cruel and unusual punishment.
Gotcha. Okay. So how did that apply to Knight's case?
Well, his lawyers, they argued that all those years on death row, you know, with the constant threat of execution hanging over his head and the isolation, all that.
Yeah.
They said it was a form of torture. Like, it went way beyond just the death penalty itself, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like the punishment had already gone on for so long. So did this argument, did it work?
Actually, it almost did. They came really close to getting a stay of execution.
Wow. Really? That's wild.
It is. It's crazy to think how close he came to, you know, getting off death row after all that time.
So did the Supreme Court get involved?
Yeah, they did. But in the end, they refused to hear any more appeals. And that, you know, that cleared the way for the execution.
Oh, wow. So it didn't work. I mean, I can see both sides of the argument, though.
Yeah.
It is a really tough question, right? Like, at what point does it become cruel and unusual?
It is a tough question. It's something people are still debating today, you know? What do you think?
Honestly, I don't know. It's complicated. But so I guess after all those legal battles, they finally, you know.
They did. In 2014, at Florida State Prison, Thomas Knight was executed by lethal injection.
Wow. First execution in the U.S. that year.
That's right.
So it's over. After all those years, do we know, what his state of mind was like in those last few days?
Well, he didn't actually make a final statement, but there's something interesting. You know, he actually converted to Islam while he was on death row, and he changed his name.
Really? What's his new name?
Askari Abdullah Muhammad.
Huh. That's interesting. It kind of makes you think, right? About faith and, trying to find some kind of redemption even after everything he did.
Absolutely. It makes you think about whether, whether someone like him can truly, atone for their past. I mean, multiple lives were lost because of him. It's tough.
Yeah. It really is. So I know it might seem a little morbid, but, people always talk about those last meal requests on death row. Did Knight ask for anything specific?
He did. He had sweet potato pie, coconut cake, banana nut bread, and then, a little Sprite, a couple tablespoons of strawberries, some butter pecan ice cream, and vanilla ice cream. Oh, and Fritos.
Fritos. That's a wild mix.
Yeah.
But okay, so we've talked about a lot, right? His childhood, all the murders, his escape, his conversion, or finally his execution after almost 40 years on death row. It's a lot.
And through all of it, he was this really controversial figure. Some people, they thought he deserved the death penalty, no question. But then others, they thought about his mental health, and his tough childhood.
It makes you think about justice, right? What does real justice even mean in a case like this? Is it just about punishment? Or is it about trying to understand why someone does these horrible things? How much does his past play into all this?
These are big questions, and they don't go away just because he was executed. It's something we're still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's true. And, we can't forget about the victims either. Sidney and Lillian Gans, William Culpepper and Richard Burke, they're the ones who ultimately paid the price.
That's really important to remember. It's easy to focus on Knight and everything he did,
Hmm.
but we shouldn't lose sight of the people whose lives were cut short.
You're right. Okay, so we've gone through a lot of dark stuff here.
We have, but I think it's important to talk about these things.
Hmm.
It's not easy, but it makes us think.
Yeah. So before we wrap things up, I'm curious, what stuck with you the most so far in this deep dive? What stands out? Honestly, it's that image of him as a kid, you know, witnessing that abuse. It's hard to shake. And he was so young when he first got in trouble with the law. Makes you wonder, like, what if someone had intervened back then? Could things have been different?
Yeah, it really does. It makes you think about how we deal with the root causes of crime as society. I
Yeah.
mean, do we just punish people?
Yeah.
Or do we actually try to prevent it in the first place? Especially when you're talking about kids who've been through serious trauma.
Yeah. It's true. We've been talking a lot about Knight and all the things he did, but there's a bigger picture here.
Exactly. This is about how we as a society view crime and punishment. It's easy to just like focus on the shocking stuff, but there's always more to it, always more going on underneath. You know what I mean?
Totally. And for me, that fact that he spent 39 years on death row,
Yeah.
it's just, I don't know, it's a long time. Like, does that even make sense? Is that really justice?
It's a question that's been around forever. And remember, his lawyers almost got his sentence overturned because of that. The whole cruel and unusual punishment thing.
It's hard to wrap your head around it.
Yeah.
All those years just waiting. And you have to think about the victims' families too. Like, how do they find any closure with all that hanging over them?
Yeah, there's no easy answer. Knight's case, it shows how complicated all this is. Like, crime affects so many people and in so many
It
ways.
really does make you think. It's like behind all the news stories and the legal stuff, there are real people whose lives are changed forever.
And that's why it's important to look closer. Go beyond the surface and really try to understand what's happening. Knight's story, it's a tragedy for everyone involved.
It really is, and it leaves you with a lot of questions.
For sure. It makes you question our ideas about justice,
Hmm. And it's tough.
punishment, and what it even means to be human.
Yeah, you're right. So this has been a pretty heavy deep dive.
Definitely. But it's a conversation we need to keep having. It's important.
You get that right.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in this deep dive into Thomas Knight's life, maybe check out some other cases on the FBI's most wanted list. See what you think.
It's always good to learn more. The more we know about all this the better we can deal with it as individuals and as a society.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll see you next time.